give us a bit of your story. Who is Nancy Pearcey, and how did you get to where you are today as an apologist and writer for the Christian faith?
Well, I was raised actually in a Christian home. It
Mm.
was a Lutheran home. My parents were both Scandinavian. So I don't know if you know that it's a little like all Scandinavians are Lutheran in the same way that all Irish are
Yes.
Catholic.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, what that meant was when I got to high school and started asking questions, nobody could answer them
Mm.
because they really weren't thinking that way. They weren't thinking in terms of apologetics. And I was attending a public high school, so all my teachers are secular, all my textbooks are secular. In fact, I didn't have a single Christian friend in high
Hmm.
school. I didn't know anyone who was Christian, and if they
Hmm.
were, they weren't telling you. This was in the 1970s, and some people tell me it was actually the late 60s, but some people tell me that was perhaps the time when America was the most secularized. We didn't have
Mm.
things like Young Life and so on, for ministries for high school kids. At any rate, so I started just asking, how do we know Christianity is true? That was it. I just wanted to know, how do we know Christianity is true? And none of my parents or pastors could answer that question. I asked a Christian university professor, why are you a Christian? And he said, works for me. And I said, that's it, because it's not working for me anymore. And
Mm.
I had a chance to talk to a seminary dean, Lutheran, and I thought I'd get a more substantial answer. But all he said was, don't worry, we all have doubts sometimes, as if
Mm.
it was psychological phase that I was going
Mm.
through. So eventually I decided Christianity must not have any answers, and I very intentionally set it aside. I decided it was up to me to find out what was true, that I would have to research all the religions and philosophies out there and decide for myself which one was true, which is a pretty big task for a 16-year-old. But I literally started walking down the hallway to the library in the public high school I attended and pulling books off the philosophy shelf because I thought, where else do people talk about this? Isn't that what philosophers are supposed to do, right? How do we know truth? And is there meaning to life? Is there purpose to life? Is there a foundation for ethics? And so on. And I pretty rapidly realized that if there was no God, then the answer to all of these questions was no, no, there is no purpose to life. There is no foundation for ethics. It's just, true for me, true for you. I realized there was even no foundation for knowledge because if all I have is my puny brain in the vast scope of time and history and space, how could I expect that I could know any sort of universal, objective, absolute truth? Ridiculous.
Mhm.
It struck me as
Mhm.
obviously ridiculous. So I became a total skeptic and relativist. I didn't have the words for it yet, but that's where I stood. And in fact, when I can remember a conversation I was having with a friend from school, and she was speaking about another person, and she said, "Oh, what she's doing is so wrong." And I said, "You can't say anybody's wrong.
Mm.
There's no such thing as right or wrong." So by the time I went to Labri, which is a couple years later, I did end up at Labri, which is the ministry of Francis Schaeffer. And I was going to school in Europe because we had lived there when I was a kid. And
Mm.
so I wanted to go back. And Labri is in Switzerland. So this was the first time I encountered any form of apologetics. I had no idea that Christianity could be defended with good reasons and arguments and logic and evidence.
Mm.
I was blown away. I had never heard any of this. And of course, as I said earlier, in addition to that, Schaeffer was really good at. He was well known for supporting the arts. Right? So he was a place where they were artistically sensitive, as well as being intellectually challenging. And in addition, by the way, this was 1971, and all the students were hippies. So,
Mm.
so this was back then. Hippies were the cool kids. So I just wondered, who are these Christians, because they're even able to reach across that cultural divide and connect with these disaffected young people. In fact, I was so impressed with Labrie that I left. I was
Mm.
after only a month, I left because I felt such pressure, internal pressure, not external, so much pressure to find out, to figure out if this was true or not. And I needed to just get away in order to think about it. But because of my time at Labri, I discovered apologetics. I continued reading Schaeffer. Os Guinness, I think, had come out with his first book by then. I discovered C.S. Lewis, G.K. Chesterton. And so just through my reading on my own, I decided I was intellectually convinced it was true. See, the reason I left is because I was afraid I might be drawn in emotionally because it was such an attractive version of Christianity. I'd never seen anything like it. And I didn't want to be drawn in emotionally. After all, Christianity had already let me down once before. And so I did not want to take that step unless I was absolutely convinced it was, intellectually that it was true. So I did come to that point, but I wasn't involved with a church or anything. So I thought, just on my own, I read my way back to God. And I thought, okay, this is cool, but where do I find other Christians now? I said, well, I knew some at Labri. So a year and a half later, I went back to Labri. And then that time I stayed 4 months and that's how I really got grounded in my understanding of Christian worldview. And so since that was such an important part of my own conversion, that became my life work, is to help other young people who are having the kind of questions that I had and help them to see that there really are good reasons for becoming a Christian. And it's not just a blind faith. It's not just, when I started having questions, Christians around me treated it as if it was a moral failing on my part, like something is wrong with you, that you don't have faith. Whereas Schaeffer used to say, we are obligated to give honest answers to honest questions. And so that's one of my guiding principles.
And then you met your husband there?
Yes. Yeah, I met my husband at Labri the second time I was there. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And he's from Germany, is that right?
He was born in Germany, of a German mom and an American soldier who abandoned her.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So he was a war orphan in a sense. So his mother put him in an orphanage. There was no way in post-war Germany with the economy in shambles that a single mom could survive. And so she was advised by her priest to put him up for adoption. So he did, and he was adopted by an American service couple. And so then they brought him back to the States when they came back.